We came up for an outline for the story before John went off to write the story. Before there was a script, we kept saying, "This reminds us of something." And John goes, "Yeah, it's Italian neorealism." And then we started going back and watching some films, and of course, it's Umberto Day. Those are words from director Kelly Reichardt on her 2008 film, Wendy and Lucy. Seeing Faces in Movies is a podcast where each month I focus on the works of a different director or cinematographer, and each week I invite a guest on to discuss a film and the artist's filmography. I'm your host, Felicia, and today we're talking about Wendy and Lucy. So a very quick synopsis of the film is, over the summer, a series of unfortunate happenings triggers a financial crisis for a young woman, and she soon finds her life falling apart. Tagline for the film is, "On the long road, friendship is everything." The film stars Michelle Williams as Wendy and Lucy as Lucy. It's written by Jonathan Raymond and Kelly Reichardt. Cinematography by Sam Levy. Directed and edited by Kelly Reichardt. And costumes by Amanda Needham. Today I have on Josh Cooley, who's rejoining me for the second time. And our first episode together was on Jarmusch's Patterson. And I think that we are kind of going for vibe movies. Obviously, that seems to be our pattern. I think those actually, now that I say it out loud, those make two very good movies together. And
Yeah.
I'm kind of sad I didn't include it as my double bill. But Josh, I'm so glad for you that you came back. I'm very excited to have you
Thanks.
back from Wendy and Lucy.
I'm so happy to be here. This is good. I'm really excited to talk about this movie that is so near and dear to my heart and hopefully all of you.
Yes. I mean, when I was planning a Right Card series, you were definitely top of mind because I know you're obviously from that region that she likes to shoot in a lot. And I just assumed, I feel like I heard you say in film club at some point that you're a Right Card fan. So I was glad to have you on, but I am curious to hear what your relationship is to her work.
Yeah, so I actually have some fun little personal anecdotes about Kelly Reichardt's work
Mm.
because like almost every location that she shot at, I've been in at some point in my life just because she shoots within the city of Portland. And so it's like, that's been the fun thing about Reichardt for me is seeing like, where's she going to shoot this movie? And then finding little spots where I'm like, oh, I remember this was in Showing Up or this was in Old Joy. It's such a joy to see someone shooting in the Northwest who understands the Northwest, but we'll get to that later because that's a huge point for this movie.
Yes.
But also, because she shoots in Portland, I've met a lot of people who are frequent collaborators with her just through inner
Oh, nice.
circles. So my old youth group leader, his son works in film, and he's one of Kelly Reichardt's main line producers, I think. I could be wrong on the title, but like he works with Reichardt pretty frequently. And so he worked with her on, I know he worked on First Cow. I think he also did Meek's Cutoff. I can't remember all the other movies that he's done with her, but he's done quite a few. But anyways, I have all these little connections to Reichardt through all the people I've met over the years. I've never physically met her yet, but someday we'll get there.
Yeah. It's a yet, I feel like. I
Mm-hmm.
feel like next time we chat, you'll have said you've had a full-blown conversation with her, and I'll be very jealous. Doing research with this, I love how kind of cut and dry she is. I feel like we'd be very close,
Mm-hmm.
good
I
friends.
mean, if you've seen her films, they're all
Yeah.
cut and dry too in a lot of ways. So it makes sense.
No, exactly. So I'm glad to talk about Wendy and Lucy because it's definitely, I think, out of her entire filmography, there's a couple that usually people who aren't necessarily bright card heads know of.
Mm-hmm.
So they know certain women. And I think they also know Wendy and Lucy. I've heard of a lot of people who probably don't even know of Reichardt at all who have seen this film or at least heard of it. So it's definitely one of her bigger ones, that's for sure.
Yeah. I've also found that First Cow is one of the big ones. I'm
Yeah?
in film school. For those of you who didn't listen to the Patterson episode, I'm getting ready to graduate from film school soon. And so talking with a lot of people, I've mentioned that I'm on this podcast talking about Wendy and Lucy, and they're like, "Oh, like who's Kelly Reichardt?" And I will mention movies, and the
Mhm.
only one they know is First Cow. And they've screened it for
Oh.
a couple of film clubs on campus. it's interesting. I don't know exactly why First Cows resonated with so many people at Biola in particular, but it's
That's so interesting. I wouldn't think of First Cow as being one of the more popular ones, but then I guess, you know, there's always like certain films that resonate more with certain groups
hmm
than
hmm
others. And probably like a film student crowd would resonate with something like First Cow versus maybe her other films.
hmm
Yeah, the only one I know that people mostly know is Certain Women, but it's also because of like the cast is
right.
stacked, right? But Wendy and Lucy does have Michelle Williams, which is definitely a drawing power, that's for sure. So, getting into the film itself, there's a lot to discuss in this film,
hmm
and it says a lot with having to not say a lot. There's a lot of, quietness in this film,
hmm
which a
hmm
a lot of her films also. What I love about this film, and as I was thinking about it, that there's a sense of, like, acceptance and lack of judgment for her characters throughout her films, and especially in this, and I talk about Kelly Reichardt not judging her character. So you never feel like she's judging Wendy for where she's at in her life. She's just like, this is where she's at, and let's follow her through these moments. I think the audience also is very much on board, and you never judge her for being like, well, you could get another job. Why are you waiting for this job in Alaska when you could get a job right now
hmm
and make sure that you have a roof over your head or can take care of your job? There's something in this film that makes it so that the audience, or at least for myself, I'll speak for myself, I was fully on board and I never questioned it. And I think it's a testament to like the writing. It's also a testament to Michelle's performance. I'm wondering how you feel in the sense of this film, but also maybe in her other films, how she treats characters who are kind of struggling with the day to day, but are still trying to better themselves, and you never feel the judgment that could be
Yeah.
placed.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned this because this is something that is distinctly I don't want to say it's distinctly Northwest about Kelly Reichardt, but it
Mhm.
is in a way because like growing up in Portland, Portland is a community that's built on a lot of things, but it's a lot of tolerance and self-discovery is like a huge like cornerstone of Portland's culture. And so growing up in the Northwest, I've always been the type of person who looks at things situationally in the sense that when I analyze like a certain situation, it's often like, oh, that person probably had a bad day or is dealing with what they're dealing with in movies like this. And so this is why I think Reichardt is one of the best filmmakers in the Northwest, is that she is building off of this exact principle in the sense of she's not looking at these characters as a binary, as a they're an asshole, they're not an asshole. She's looking at characters more as a complete picture of like each action and mistake and idea of what they are. And I think that's what makes Reichardt's like the best filmmaker in the Northwest. Also, she shoots in the Northwest because
Mhm.
Oregon's tax benefits are not good enough for most filmmakers, apparently. And so they mostly, any movie that takes place in Oregon or Washington or anywhere in the Northwest, almost always shot in Vancouver. No disrespect to
Yeah.
Canada, but it is annoying because it's not quite the same. But anyways, yeah, it's interesting to see a filmmaker tackle things that way because sometimes filmmakers can have scripts that focus more on just like like trying to figure out who they are in like a one word sentence. But in
Mhm.
Reichardt's entire filmography, there's not you can't describe each of her characters in one word. You can't describe the two guys from First Cow in one word. You can't describe Wendy in one word. Other than like maybe misunderstood, but even then that doesn't capture the whole picture. And I think that even the non-main characters, you see this arc where it's like they can be judgmental towards others and then they come full circle and end up helping them in the end. I think of like the security guy, I guess, standing outside
Mhm.
of
Mhm.
I think it's a Fred Meyer. I've been to that exact spot. I know exactly where this was shot. But yeah, that's a common theme in Reichardt's filmography is not necessarily judging people but based on the actions that only a few people manage to see.
No, I fully agree, and there's a lot that you said that I definitely want to touch upon because I would love to hear your take on it, specifically as someone who's from that region of the States. But something you did say in terms of her not be her characters not being able to, or you can't really describe her characters in one word or even a sentence. I fully agree, and I think it's because they're so human. I think that there's a lot of directors, even like if we talk about it, Jarmusch, who we've talked about, he also has a lot of human humanist characters, and there's a lot of people who try to make characters seem very human and real, but there's still kind of like this is the bucket that they fit into. Whereas Reichardt, through watching her films, but also just hearing her talk about films and the way she collaborates with her actors and writers, she's very much tapping into, hey, this actor can provide me this. This is also something that's part of their personality, and I'm taking this. And that's why it feels very real. And that's why it feels like you will never know everything about that character, and half the time you do not know what happened prior to when we get the opening credits, and we don't know what happens after, and it doesn't really matter
Hmm.
because it's sometimes you might be traveling and you bump into people and you talk to them and you vibe with them and you don't know anything about their life prior or after this. And it feels like that's how she operates and why her characters feel very relatable and like
Hmm. Hmm.
something that you could watch 20 years from now and nothing feels dated. Because also, Wendy and Lucy is a much older film now. It's almost 20 years old now. And it doesn't feel dated at all. At least for me, it didn't feel dated in any sense. That obviously now we would probably have more technology in our hands than we did in 2006, but it doesn't feel like anything that she's going through is out of the ordinary for even now.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that I love the fact that you mentioned the fact that we don't really know what happens before and after each given movie, because I think that it points out another flaw that a lot of filmmakers have that Kelly Reichardt doesn't, and that is like when a filmmaker tries to make a slice of life movie,
Mm,
oftentimes they try and capture emotions before and after, where like they'll do flashback sequences or an epilogue that doesn't make sense. Reichardt knows exactly the moment to make a perfect slice of life. Because Wendy and Lucy
mhm,
is in my opinion, probably one of the greatest examples of this, because it's not trying to capture a life. It's just trying to capture this tiny, tiny little chunk of it. Like, you know, a lesser filmmaker would definitely showcase almost the entire journey, and Wendy and Lucy would just be a 20-minute segment of a 2.5 hour movie about this woman's journey. And the fact that, I mean, the movie's still short. I mean, this podcast episode has the potential to be longer than Wendy and Lucy, but it it doesn't feel short because it's so contained.
no, I agree. I That's what I love. Like, she does have longer films, but I find that even the shorter ones, like, this was, like, 80 minutes or so, and even something like Eight Old Joy is, like, 76 minutes.
Hmm.
Um, it never feels like it's bloated within its time and like they were rushing through. Sometimes you feel like you watch a shorter film, and you're like, "Oh, okay, they were rushing through and there was
Hmm.
budget constraints, that's why
Yep.
this movie's so short." This never feels like that. This feels like we've told the story that we wanted to tell, and it happened to take this amount of time. And, like, I'm always grateful when people are efficient with their time. She's very
Hmm.
efficient director. That's for
Yep.
sure.
Yeah, and I think that she knows exactly what to tell and doesn't like go any further.
Exactly. Which a lot of people could study that and take advice from that because, we both know with a lot of every year we get our Oscar movies, and every year those movies are getting longer and longer, and they're saying
Hmm.
less and less. I don't know why every movie needs to be almost 3 hours, and you watch it and you're like, you could have told us at 90.
Yep.
more efficiently. So we need to take some notes from Reichardt. But a couple things that were already on my list to talk about, and you already talked about, and I specifically wanted to bring it up because I know you're from Portland, but the the landscape, and the importance of the landscape in her films and in this film. So there's a lot of outdoors in Kelly Reichardt's films. A lot of
Hmm.
time, it's very rare that any story it takes place primarily indoors, whether it's they're out in nature or it's just they're walking through a city or whatnot. Um, a lot of outdoor space. And there's a lot of outdoor space in this film where she's walking around the kind of unnamed town. For anyone who's not familiar with Portland, I wouldn't know. I'm not from that area. I personally wouldn't know because I know it was filmed in a part of Portland, as
Yes.
far as I know. There's no part of me that would ever know that. I just assumed it was kind of like a small town, that she filmed this in Oregon.
Hmm.
Because obviously she's filming it in like a certain area that makes it look a lot smaller than it actually probably is.
Yeah. I don't remember exactly where they filmed it. I know I've been there before, but it's like they shot it in an area that's like just outside the urban, just within the urban growth boundary. Because the way Portland is set up as a city is that they have like a strict boundary where it's like after this point, no more city. The rest is just farmland. And so a
Mm,
lot of these scenes are shot, I think, in this area in just northwest of Portland, where it's still, I think it's still in the Portland city limits, but it feels like a smaller town. And there's pockets of Portland there too, because there's also a lot of that in northeast Portland where you get
mhm.
into like the Gresham and like the Gorge area. And I think that's where it was shot. But yeah, it does have a distinctly like small town feel despite being shot in a major city. And
Yes,
that's really hard to do.
very hard to do, and I love that because it feels like what by the time I was watching it for this podcast, I had either watched for the first time or rewatched a lot of her other films that were very heavily nature spaced outdoors. So this felt like, okay, she's going into the city, but it doesn't feel like a big city. It's like, I'm not shooting in LA or I'm not shooting in Toronto, where I can tell this is like a condensed city. This felt very like spacious and it felt like the small town that I grew up in. And I bring it up because there's two things. One, the way that people interact with each other felt very small town to me, and maybe that's just a Portland thing that I don't know about. Or it just was like this part of Portland where people are feel very much more small town, where they're more willing to actually have a conversation with you. And then there's another point that I read in an interview, where someone was interviewing Reichardt, and they talk about the way the characters interact with Wendy. But at first, before I get into that, I do want to hear your thoughts on the interactions between the characters in this film because there's not that many characters in this film at all. We get the characters in the grocery store, we get the characters at the car shop, and then the security guard that you mentioned, and then there's I guess a couple of characters at the pound as well that she
Hmm.
kind of interacts with. So it's all things that people are working people in this town. We don't really get any randoms that she comes across. Actually, apart from the when she goes to, I think it's like the first night that we see her, and she's at this like barn. There's like a fire where people are having like kind of just a
Hmm.
conversation where other travelers are along. So we had that conversation there. So I'm wondering how you feel about the portrayal of Northwest in this film and the way people interact because you're from America and I know you know that people from different states and different regions of the states probably interact differently to one another than especially strangers.
Yeah, it's interesting because the way that these characters in Wendy and Lucy are portrayed is like I don't know how to describe it. It's like it's not how people interact now in Portland, but it's how people used to interact. I mean, Portland's been a city that's been wrought with a lot of change, both positive and negative, and I feel like
Okay.
one of the things that's been missing is like that feeling of like community and camaraderie that the city used to have, but as it like expanded and more people started moving in, it just became less like that. And I think that this is why this movie feels so like aggressively nostalgic for me. And it's hard for me to explain to other people why it's so
Mm-hmm.
nostalgic, but it's like this is the parts of Portland that I grew up going to, and it's the parts that like still had a bit of like I don't want to call it Southern hospitality, but it's like kind of like that in a weird way where it's like, you know, people who all don't have a lot helping other people. And I feel like that was a common theme in Portland for a long time. And then all of a sudden the homeless crisis there got worse. And that just kind of I don't want to say it disappeared. It's still there in places, but it's changed. It's different. And I think that Kelly Reichardt nailed the Portland of that era. I mean, I was really, really young when Wendy and Lucy would have come out, but from
Mm-hmm.
what I remember from that era, it feels distinctly like that, where it's a lot of just like people who I guess appear cold, but then like you actually interact with them and then you're like, oh yeah, they're actually nice. And I think that that still exists in the Northwest. It's people who like are nice at their core but act mean. I think is how
Mm-hmm.
I'll put it. I think of the guy outside the Fred Meyer again, the security guard. He starts off being like, you can't sleep here, and is like trying to like
Mm-hmm.
enforce all the rules, and then is like, actually, here you can use my phone number to find this dog, and I will help you every step of the way. I think that is the Northwest because it's like I feel like there was a meme a while ago where it was like it divided the U.S. into like different regions. It's like whether or not they actually are nice or mean, or whether or not they act nice and mean. It's like I
Mm-hmm.
remember the Northwest was like I think they said that it was acts nice is nice, but I don't even think that's true. I think it's this feeling of sometimes people can appear cold and don't want to talk to you, and then once you like actually start interacting with them, you're like, oh yeah, they're cool. I can vibe with them. And I think that yeah, Wendy and Lucy really nails that.
No, it's very interesting. That feels very much like Toronto, where it's like it feels very cold. Even as someone like I didn't grow up in Toronto, but I've been here for a long time, and I can tell the difference between where I grew up, which is a much smaller town, and people being like actually nice and wanting to help you. Whereas like in Toronto, it's like what you said. People appear cold, but once you actually break basically the ice, then they're very nice and helpful. But there is definitely an ice to break.
Hmm.
They're not going to just offer you their hospitality right off the bat, which kind of brings it into because you mentioned something that was ties it into what I was going to bring up. So, you mentioned Southern hospitality. So there was an interview which I'll link in the show notes for the listener to check out. But an interviewer, I think it was Slant magazine, was interviewing Reichardt, and at this point, Wendy and Lucy had already it'd been a few years old, so they're looking back on it, and the interviewer was like, they didn't find that the people in the film were helpful enough in
Mm.
towards Wendy, and they said specifically if she wasn't traveling to Alaska and was traveling down south, someone would have kind of scooped her up and helped her and been like, "You need to get off the streets. Let's help you until you get on your feet and move on." Again, as someone I'm speaking as an outsider who's not from the States, and I know you've traveled a bit around, or definitely you travel way more than I would have around the States.
Mm.
Um, I'm wondering what you think about that. If she wasn't traveling to Alaska and she had changed her route to go down south, do you think things would have been vastly different for her? Or do people just think that the South's hospitality is a lot better than it actually is?
Yes. Man, because like right now, I feel like I'm about to diss the entire American South. I've been there a lot.
Sorry.
I love it. No, no, there's a lot to talk about with this. Uh, I think that from my experience in the South, the South, it's like expected to act hospitable, but it's kind of the opposite, where it's like there's
Mm.
ice to break in Portland, and in the South, it's like they're gonna be nice to you, but like some people, not everyone, some people are gonna act really nice and then end up being really mean in the end. You know, it's kind of like when you're like going through Texas and someone says "bless your heart," that either means like it either means like they actually mean it or it means that they hate you. And there's no other
Oh,
way to
no.
interpret it. It's kind of their polite way of saying F off. Like it's
Mm.
but I think that the big thing is that a lot of the characters that are portrayed in this movie, it's also characters who don't have a lot. And I think that's the big thing is it's like the reason these people couldn't help her more is not out of lack of care, it's out of lack of resources, you know? Like
Mhm.
the guy at the Fred Meyer, he's a part-time security guard job. Like how would someone like him be able to help her more than he already did? Like he could have offered her his house, but like who knows how small that house is? My guess is it's
Yeah.
not that big. And so it's like there's that aspect of it too, in the sense that it's not about how kind people are, it's about what they have to offer. It's like you don't see Wendy going up to, you know, a guy in a suit and being like, "Can you help me?" And then he's like, "Oh, I don't know." Like then it would be more cut and dry. It would be more a feeling of like, well, that guy is just not willing to help people. And then but
Mhm.
then that breaks the immersion of the not being judgmental of every character thing. Cause then it's like, there's a clear and distinct villain. Whereas every side character in this movie, it's like, yes, there's some that act mean, but it's like, you know, I think of the guy at the store who's like
Mhm.
overly like hostile towards her. It's like, you know, he's just doing his job and he may have been a bit aggressive and a bit, you know, over overbearing, I guess is the word I'll use,
Mhm.
but at the same time it's like you kind of understand like he's young, he probably doesn't have much going for him. He just needs to keep his job, and if he messes up too much, there's there's a problem there. And so it's like every character, regardless of what they've done, it's like you can kind of understand where they're coming from. And I think that if these characters like helped them unconditionally, I think the nuance of the film wouldn't work. It's not, there's that feeling of like these characters are trying to help each other, but it's like there's things in their way that just like don't work in this situation. So yeah, I just think that, yeah, like I said, I think it would ruin the nuance if they went down to the South and you said you had it would just be, I
Mhm.
guess it would be a different nuance, because then it's like if you went down to the South, there'd be a lot of people who would be like super willing to help, but it's like, to what extent would they help? I have no idea.
Yeah. Exactly. No, that was perfectly said, and I fully agree. Even as an outsider who doesn't have really much of frame reference, but I'm glad that you even brought up the grocery store worker who, in another film, would be the villain, but he isn't villainized here, and even still, you don't feel the judgment. You
Mm-hmm.
kind of want to hate him because
Mm-hmm.
you're obviously going to be on Wendy's side from the start.
Yep.
But you also it's so hard to hate him because you're like, well, he is just doing his job. He's a young guy who probably is trying to move up. Maybe he, you know, this is the job for him. And he's like, I need to keep this job for whatever reason, and I need to move up the ranks. And the way to do that is to kind of just be like, hey, I'm hyper vigilant, or I'm hyper aware, and I'm hyper um knowing, and I care about this company. And that's just a personality thing, right? You can't
Mm-hmm.
fully hate him for that. I don't think that he was doing it out of malice for her specifically. She just happened to be the target, unfortunately, because at the end of the day, she still did steal the items, even though I'm fully for it. But also at the end of the day, you're like, the way the grocery store is presented, it seems like it might be a chain. I don't know, to be honest, because I don't know that we see a name, but it feels like it's more of a mom and pop grocery store. So you're kind of like, oh, that sucks that she's stealing from them. but
Mm.
why she's stealing it. She's not stealing for herself. She's stealing for her dog. It's like everyone is being affected in this situation, and that's what makes it feel a lot more human and why it hurts so much when
Mhm.
she gets put in jail for that, short amount of time and ends up losing Lucy, which we can now get into because we haven't really talked about Lucy at all. We've been talking a lot about Wendy, but the film is called Wendy and Lucy, and Lucy's definitely an important factor in this film.
Oh yeah.
Lucy is a dog that she travels around with, and they're both very much attached to each other. They're both very in sync and in tune with one another. And when she loses Lucy, even when she's being taken away in the cop car, her immediate thought goes to Lucy, being like, my dog's outside, chained up there. And you as an audience member, unless you're like a monster, you're gonna be like, yeah, the dog's tied outside there. Like, you can't leave the dog there. So you're immediately stressed and on board. I think a dog is a great device to get people on board. Any animal is gonna always be a great device to get people fully on board. And I don't think she's using it as a device. I wonder how you feel about that, but I think that it is a great tool for sure. I think even if it hadn't been a dog, we still would have been on board with Lucy's life, but it definitely helps. I wonder how you feel about the emotional invokement that it brings to have an animal involved in a story and how it's going to make a lot of audience members immediately feel emotionally invested in a story.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to explain like the exact reason why people feel so emotionally invested in like movie dogs. Like it's just like
Mhm.
I feel like that's just like a weird part of human nature where like you see a dog, it's like one of those things where it's like you could see a lot of people getting murdered in a movie, but then when a dog like when a character steps on a dog's tail, you're like, no, that's the worst person. And it's it's a lot of that feeling where it's like you get overly emotionally attached to the animal in this situation. And I think that Reichardt is using it as a device to talk about like what it means to provide. Because I think that one of the things she's talking about in this movie in particular is this idea of like Wendy does not have much at all. And so there is, and that ties into the ending, which we will 100% get to. But there is that theme of like, she desperately wants to be able to continue to provide for other people, but can barely provide for herself. And so there's a lot of that complicated feeling. And it's like, with the dog there, it like becomes way more heartbreaking than if it was like another person. Because it's like if it was another person, it'd be like, okay, bye. And then they'd like go you'd say their separate ways. And it's like, well, but like the fact that it's a dog who's so emotionally attached to her human and seeing that bond get slowly deteriorated towards the end of the movie, it does hit you more emotionally the themes that it's going for. Because that was my main thing that I walked out of the movie this time thinking about was like, what would change if Lucy were a human? Because like a lot of filmmakers use like children for that. If they're doing a theme of providing, they'll use children.
Yep.
But it's a little bit different, I guess, because like yes, children are dependent to their families, but the way that they're not just gonna like if they hear that like, oh, there's a child on the street tied
Mhm.
up. I mean, obviously they're gonna be like, why is there a child tied to the post? But
Yeah.
you know, there is that sense of like, oh, there is more urgency when it comes to children, and so they would definitely like. And so if Lucy were a child, which is a weird comparison to make, but a lot of things would have changed very drastically. But the fact that it's like it's a dog, and like in our society we view animals as like, I don't want to say it's like a luxury per se, but it's like it's not something that everybody like has or wants or can have in some ways. There's that aspect of it because it's like it's a completely different species to us, and it's still weird to think about like why we even have pets in the first place.
Mhm.
But it's also it just does a really good job of adding that other layer of nuance of like, what does it mean for Wendy to be able to provide for Lucy?
No, there's so much you said there that I fully agree with,
Mm.
and I'm so glad you brought up one in particular. I don't think it's a weird thing, the comparison between a child and a dog. Like, I get, yes, it might sound weird saying it out loud, but it's also still like they're two different entities that, yes, probably a dog could survive on its own. It probably could, an adult dog. But they've still been domesticated in a way, so they do still
Mhm.
rely on humans in some form or another. And babies definitely couldn't survive on their own.
Yep.
If it had been a child she had, the story would have been completely different.
Yep. And people are also more likely to help mothers too. That's another
100%.
huge, like, you know, the amount of times I've seen like unhoused people on the streets of Portland and like
Yeah.
not notice them, but then the second I see like a mother and child, I'm like, I want to like help them out in any way. Like that is like an immediate thing. And like a lot of unhoused people in Portland have dogs too, but it's like it is a little different in that way. So that's another aspect of it.
Exactly. That's the thing. You're immediately going to it's not even necessarily for the mom that you care for, it's more so the kid a lot of the time, and you're like, "How can I help this child?" Whereas a dog, it's not that people don't want to help the dog, they do, but there's even a line in this film where the guy from the grocery store is like, "Well, if she can't afford a dog, she shouldn't have one," and that's
Hmm.
definitely a
Hmm.
mindset that people would
Yep.
have. To be like, if you can't afford to take care of this animal, you shouldn't have one. And I know that's a mindset that a lot of people might have. And sometimes that unfortunately is true. There's a lot of people who have animals that they really shouldn't have.
Yeah.
But then there are situations such as Wendy's where she would do anything for this dog. And we see that she spends quite literally all of her money that she has left in order to make sure that she can get this dog back and get back on the road, and she ends up at the end with nothing. Like, she didn't have the dog, which we'll get into. She didn't have her car, which she's living out of, because we haven't really mentioned that she's living out of. And all of this issue really starts happening. Well, there was issues with the car itself, but the other issue is happening because she realizes Wendy is or Lucy is out of food. That's why she steals the food from the grocery store. She gets arrested. Lucy gets taken away to the pound. Um, and then, so on. And it's very heartbreaking when you watch the struggle because you feel it doesn't matter. I've never had a dog, and I still felt every moment of her when every time she would call them and every time she would try and get any help from anyone about the dog. I think that if it had been another human, even not even say like a child, but another adult that she'd been traveling with that she lost, again, like you said, it would be a completely different story. And I don't know how you would get people emotionally invested without giving backstory.
That is the hard thing because then the other thing about dogs in movies is that they can be used as a plot device. If you use another human as a plot device, you still have to like give them like a little bit of substance
Yeah.
because like if yeah, you can't use another like if it were another adult, you can't use that adult as a like strictly a plot device. You have to give that adult some kind of arc and some
Yeah.
motivation to disappear, and you have to explain their relationship beforehand. Whereas a human and a dog, you kind of understand that relationship immediately. It just clicks in your mind instantaneously, like, oh yes, those two are attached at the hip because
Mhm.
they've been together through things. And it's like with people, human relationships are so much more complicated than that. And so you have to get into that. And I do think that would add a lot. It would get rid of the slice of life feel that this movie has. So
I feel like then it becomes like a thriller of some sorts or a
hmm.
mystery film as opposed to a slice of life. But, getting towards the end of the story, the end of the film, Wendy does eventually find where Lucy is. And she's with an older gentleman. And she sees that when Lucy, I keep calling her Wendy, that Lucy is in a house, has a backyard, seems happy. The man seems nice, as far as you know, because you never know. I'm just seeing someone. But Wendy has a moment of playing with Lucy and realizing at this point in my life, I cannot provide this for you. And it's not going to be anytime soon that I can provide this for you, which would be the same thing, if we think about like adoption and with kids, bringing it back to kids. A lot of the reasons why people might give up a kid for adoption is because I can't provide the life that you should have. And maybe someone else can do that for you. And that's essentially what Wendy is doing. It obviously is incredibly hard to watch, especially when you've been watching her searching for Lucy this entire film. And again, it's not a long film, but it feels like in retrospect, you're like, oh, this is a long time that we've been watching her search for Lucy the same way we'd all do. And she ends up giving or leaving Lucy there, and you never again judge her for it. You're like, that's an incredibly brave thing to do, and it freaking sucks. And I don't know that I would be brave enough to do it. And it's beautiful to watch, and it doesn't feel cheap, like it's trying to make Wendy out to seem like a hero. It just feels like Wendy's being honest about things, maybe for the first time, really, to herself, of being like, I can't do this right now. But she says, I'll come back for you. So there's two questions I have for you. One, how do you feel about that ending of just her deciding to go against what her ultimate goal was, which was to find Lucy, which she does find Lucy, but gives her up temporarily, as we say. And the second question is, and this is just personal, do you think she would ever go back for Lucy?
Mm, hmm I I love that second question. We'll pin that one for now
Yeah.
because I want to talk about the first one. The ending is like I think that again, a lesser director would like edit in montage scenes and make it a sad moment. And I don't think it's not a sad moment, but like the fact
Mhm.
that there's very little there's no parallel editing, there's very little editing at all. It's mostly just her like seeing the surroundings, seeing the dog happy and is like, all right, this is what has to be done. And I think that
Yeah.
we've all had those moments where it's like when things go so far south in what's going on in our lives where we have to make drastic changes and have to make big sacrifices to keep ourselves afloat and alive. It's just a normal
Mhm.
part of every human has experienced an extent of that. And I think that this is that moment for this character. And so I relate to it on a lot of very personal levels in that way. Maybe I haven't experienced everything she's experienced, but I have had this feeling of like, I can't like, I can barely provide for myself. Like, how do I provide for someone else in this situation? And like, how do I cope with that? And I think that it comes back to your second question of like, would she come back? And my immediate thought is I have no idea.
Yeah, I know.
I think that there's this sense of me that like believes in movie magic and is like, oh, she'll come back. But it's also like she has to be real. And it's like there is this sense also in this film of like once you come somewhere, you're like you just don't look back. Because that's most of this movie is her like not looking back on where she left and just like being where she is. And I think that there is this sense of like, oh, I'm going to Alaska. I'm fulfilling my duty. And unfortunately, she has to leave Lucy behind. And that's devastating. But at the same time, I do think there's this level of, I just need to keep going and get where I need to be. And then hopefully everything works itself out.
I think that's my mentality too. I think that again, in a beautiful world, she goes back and gets Lucy, but also maybe she gets to Alaska, makes some money, living her life, and realizes maybe I still, even if I could afford it, maybe I don't necessarily want to afford a dependent, which is
Hmm
fair. And it's still hard to admit that to yourself or even to other people, but it's still a fair thing to be like, I can't do this. I can take care of myself, and that's all I can do. And I don't necessarily think it's a selfish thing. I think it's just being honest with oneself.
it's probably one of the least selfish things in all honesty because like this Lucy clearly has like a place where she's provided for. And so
Yeah.
giving up Lucy and like to a place where she can be provided for when she can't at that given moment, to me, it's
Yeah.
like anybody who reads that as a selfish act of like she's getting rid of the dog to like make sure she stays okay. It's like to me, it's not even about that. It's like she wants what's best for Lucy, and this is what's best for Lucy in this moment because she's not at the capability to provide for herself, let alone anyone else. And so I think that it's actually a deeply selfless act in that
Yeah.
regard. Because like the only reason why she's holding on to Lucy is because it's like they're companions, they're tied together at the hip. And it's like to willingly choose to let that go, to continue to provide for yourself is a deeply selfless act.
Exactly. Because I feel like a lot of people need someone or something, some sort of motivation to carry on. So to be able to be like, I just need to carry on for myself, that is selfless, and I think it's also brave to do that because a lot of people need, she might have been like, I need to do this because I need to make sure that I have food or can provide for Lucy. And now she realizes someone else can provide for her even better. Now she has to provide it. She has to do these things and carry on for herself, which is a whole other task to
Mhm,
do
mhm.
because a lot of people find it hard, myself included, to self motivate. I feel like that's
Yeah.
probably the hardest way to get motivated. It's easy if you have pressure, people pressuring you for whatever, but to the pressure for yourself is rough. Some people can do it. I can't. But I am curious before I move on to the second segment, just to give some context to the listeners about where Reichardt was in her career. If there's anything before we move on that we haven't spoken about, we'll circle back to it in the third segment.
One of the interesting things to me is how it how it like talks and discusses about like the unhoused experience. I think that is a really interesting because like a lot of times movies will portray it as like this overt negative thing where it's like this character has hit rock bottom. There's a lot of movies where
Yeah,
like characters start unhoused and then find their way. That's a common story arc, but it's like this is not about that. It's not about the unhoused experience per se, but it deeply connects to it in a way because it's like a lot of unhoused people need to make really big, unfortunate sacrifices. And there's a lot. I mean, I've been blessed to have had a place to live, like a shelter, my entire life. So I can't like fully speak on that experience,
yeah,
but I have interacted with people who have throughout the years. And so I can kind of understand it. But it's also like there's that sense of community. There's like that bonfire scene where it's like a bunch of people who have, from what I can gather, haven't haven't met each other or don't really know each other that well, all just kind of hanging out and talking. But then there's also that moment where after she loses Lucy, where she's like asleep in the forest, and like you see like that other guy who's like that's
yeah.
another angle of the unhoused experience that you see the duality of it, where it's the community versus the hostility, I guess. And that's an interesting angle, especially again going back to Portland because you can't have a Kelly Reichardt movie without talking about the Northwest, in my opinion. And so, coming back
Mhm.
to Portland, you know, Portland is one of the cities in American news that is commonly talked about for its unhoused crisis. I do think it's a problem. I do think it's something that more people should be aware of and talking about, but I don't think that it's as nasty as some American news outlets portray it as, I guess. And so seeing this angle where it's not trying to like say that they're a bad person because they're unhoused or they're like at rock bottom because they're unhoused, they're just lost or confused or on a journey, as some are. I think that there's this level of sympathy but also empathy because we've all been there. We've all been at that time where we want to go on a crazy adventure and do things differently than how we're
Yeah.
doing. And I think that it's Wendy's character arc is a lot of searching for new meaning.
I'm so glad that you brought that up because so the character that you mentioned, one of the more negative instances, and it's negative in the sense that because it is terrifying, especially as a woman, but you can also tell that there's other factors at play, like mental health crisis at play.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of things. One, I didn't know that Portland had a huge housing crisis, but I guess that makes sense because it's a bigger city, and I think a lot of big cities, Toronto including, has a huge housing crisis, with a lot of people living in on the streets or in tents and the way people treat them. Um,
Hmm. Hmm.
so there's multiple angles that are being at play here, and why it never feels like it's one thing or why it's judgmental. It feels like sometimes we're just watching people who are willingly living this lifestyle and they're travelers and they're like, I'm living in my car. And then there's people who are unhoused and are not willingly in the situation and are going through a rough time and are trying to get out of it. I think Wendy's in the middle of both these things. And then we get the character played by Larry Fessenden, he kind of comes up on her as she's trying to sleep, and he's talking to himself, and it's very kind of violent jargon, but you kind of from just watching him feel like there's other factors at play, like he is going through probably a mental health crisis, and that's
Hmm.
why Wendy kind of treats it like, okay, I'm gonna wait till he finishes because one, this is terrifying. I'm alone and I don't know what he's gonna do. And also, he doesn't seem hopefully like he might do anything. So she kind of waits it out. But it's still a very tense scene in the film. And I like that she never feels like she's judging people for the positions they're in, but she's also saying that hey, this is not a great time for a lot of people all the time. It's not like a fairy tale, like, oh, it's nice to be unhoused, which some
Hmm.
films might do to be like, this is like a whimsical time for these people. And it's like, a lot of time it's not. Like they
Yeah.
are waiting for their next meal. And it's great to have that balance of just her fully understanding. And she said in times in interviews that she's like, I've been in positions like Wendy, but I've also had great people around me who made sure I was fed. So I never was
Hmm.
lower than that. Like I never was begging for food, but she fully understood. And I think it takes for people to actually understand what it's like to not have something and be waiting for the next time they can get something to
Yeah.
survive to
And I
portray that.
and I think that that's like a really like nuanced reaction because like again a lesser filmmaker would like have the main character be I don't want to say more afraid because like she's clearly afraid at this moment, but it's like
Yeah.
more reactive, I guess. But it's
Hmm.
like I have had so many experiences with the unhoused where it's like they will like say things and ramble to me where it's like if I just let them ramble and even try and engage with their incoherent conversation, like I'll get into like a brief personal story. I this is like about a year ago. I had an encounter with an unhoused person who was clearly on a drug episode of sorts, but it was like that whole situation. I was like, for a weird reason, I was never like, despite the fact that she was saying crazy things, I was never like fully afraid. I just kind of listened
Mm,
and kept like asking follow up questions to the unhinged meth induced rants of
mm,
this woman that I interacted with, and it was just like I think that there's also this feeling of like a lot of these people will do ramble like that. Yes, it's a lot of mental health crises. Yes, it's probably a mixture of drug addiction and untreated disorders, but it's also a sense of like they haven't been paid attention to and they want some kind of attention and this is how they do it through with all the other factors at play. And I think
yeah.
that that scene is an interesting angle because it's not about a character like being afraid and like running away and like screaming and reacting. It's more about a character just like sitting there and being like, I'm going to let him keep going. I'm going to let him stop eventually. And I'll run away if he gets more dangerous.
Yeah. I mean, it also shows that this is probably not the first time she's encountered this.
Absolutely.
So she's probably well versed on how to deal with the situation, which just comes with life experience that because that's part of life. Like we can't get I'm sure we'd love to get rid of the housing crisis and make sure everyone has a home over their
Mhm.
they're living in a home, but as we're speaking right now, this doesn't seem to be a realistic end to it anytime soon, unfortunately.
And it's more than housing too, is the other thing. It's like it's not even about like you can give someone a home, but like if you
Hmm.
don't give them the proper treatment and the proper skills and the proper
Yeah.
ability to function in society again, it's just gonna end up just as bad. They just like have a roof.
Yep.
So that's
Exactly.
another angle of it.
I mean, it's wild to me when people look at some of her films like on the surface level, especially people who are not. I hate to say, especially people who are not versed in her work, but people who might not be adept to slower cinema. I think
Hmm.
it's very much a one-dimensional story that she's telling about just a woman who's trying to find her dog, and it's like it's so much more.
Hmm.
As if you've
Hmm.
been listening to this conversation we've been having, we've broken the surface essentially. And sure, we could go on longer, but I do want to talk about what she did right before this and right after, just to give the audience a little bit of context and get into the second segment before we go back to the film itself and wrap up. But for the before and after segment, what Reichardt did right before this. So Wendy and Lucy's 2008. She does in 2006 Old Joy. Um,
Hmm.
and this is a film essentially in like a nutshell about two old friends who go on a bit of a road trip to find these hot springs, and they haven't seen each other in a while. And you can tell kind of pretty early on that they have grown apart just from living life. And that's what happens to friends, people, even friends who see each other all the time, let alone friends who don't see each other all the time. What's interesting about this film is that prior to Old Joy, she had made one other feature film called River of Grass, and that was like 15 years before this. So she had made that in the 90s. And the reason for the gap is because she just couldn't get funding for film. And if you are now, especially now with Reichardt, who's even bigger than she would have been when she released something like Wendy and Lucy, it's kind of wild to think that she wasn't getting funding, but that's just how the industry works. But Wendy and Lucy is when she starts getting name actors. So Michelle Williams, who stars in this film, she was already a huge name at this point. People have known Michelle Williams since Dawson's Creek era, which from the 90s. So she's been well known. And there's definitely some people who would have gone into Wendy and Lucy because they saw Michelle Williams. And what she does right after this is Meek Cutoff in 2010. And this is it's a Western film. A lot of people describe it as a kind of a bit of a revisionist Western. I don't know how I love that term. I think
Hmm.
that it's just a straight up Western that's told from a different perspective. And I think because a woman is the star, people think of as a revisionist. I disagree. I think it's just a straight up Western film.
I agree
Um,
wholeheartedly with that.
I'm glad that you do. And I think as someone myself who's a huge Western fan, I think everything, all the themes and storyline and every beat is basically Western 101. And Reichardt also says that she's like, I'm not reinventing the wheel here. It's just you guys are not used to seeing certain characters being the highlight of a film. So that's what she does right after that. So at this point, she's starting to get more name actors because Meek's cut off. We also get back Michelle Williams, we get Zoe Kazan, we get Paul Dano, who is obviously in the news a lot. I mean, maybe when this episode's released, it might be less relevant, but we got Paul Dano a lot. And um, she's making films more often. So we get, 2006, 2008, 2010, as opposed to the 15-year gap. So
Mhm.
I'm sure you've probably seen, or maybe you haven't, but you've seen both of these films.
I
I
have,
don't know if you have
yes.
any thoughts on just like kind of that trajectory.
Yeah, yeah. I think the trajectory is really interesting to me because like Old Joy and especially Wendy and Lucy, they still have the independent sensibilities And it's
Mhm.
not that Meek's Cutoff doesn't, but like it feels bigger, I guess.
Yeah,
And
it
I think
does.
that Wendy and Lucy is definitely a solid, like, starting, like, a jumping point, I guess, to something bigger. And I think, because it's Wendy and Lucy is so, like, I guess, approachable, but also really nuanced, it got people interested in what Reichardt was doing so well. And I think that it's not that Old Joy didn't have that nuance. It's just that movie in particular to me is rooted in a lot of like Northwestern ideals of self discovery, and it's one of those movies where
Mm.
I think you can totally appreciate the movie, like you can appreciate Old Joy without having been to or lived in the Northwest, but you can't like fully get into some of the intricacies. And I think that once we get to Meek's Cutoff, a lot of those intricacies start to, I don't want to say they start to lose, but you still get the slow sense of pacing that she has. A lot of the trademarks are still there, but you lose a lot of the distinctly Northwestern based plot devices, I guess.
Mhm.
And so I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, but it's like I view Reichardt's early cinema with such an interesting layer of nostalgia for a Portland that once was, and to some
Yeah.
extent still is. Whereas stuff like First Cow and Meek's Caught Up, it's like they're still shot in the area. I think I know First Cow is. I don't know if Meek's Caught Up is or not. I think it is. But it's not as distinctly Northwest filmmaking as those two are. And I think that once you get further and further, you start to lose some of that, but not all of it.
No, that's very interesting to hear from your perspective for sure. And I agree, they do feel a lot bigger, especially if you're watching them kind of in order. It feels like she's getting bigger and bigger again, and it still isn't as big as a lot of other filmmakers would go. It's just big for the Reichardt scale.
Hmm.
So, which is interesting, to even talk about on that level. But no, I fully agree. And if we go into the trademarks, I feel like we've talked about a lot of them so far, just kind of through our natural conversation, but I should try and pick one that we might not have or one that I really kind of want to talk about. But what I had in my notes was kind of, the absence of backstory and then the outdoor space and the relevance, but I feel like we kind of talked about both. I don't know if there's any trademarks that you wanted to bring up that
I
we
mean,
haven't chatted about.
we haven't talked about one of the biggest Reichardt trademarks, in my opinion, and this is something I've noticed in film school circles, especially. So many people find Reichardt cinema to be slow.
Yeah.
I think
Hmm.
that I don't think it's that big of a trademark personally. I just think it's something she does. I mean, I guess that's a trademark in a sense, but other filmmakers do that too. It's not just her thing, but there is this sense, like, because when I had a friend who screened First Cow for, so I'm the president of a film club called the Impact Film Club on my campus, where we talk about
Hmm.
movies that have impacted us as people. And one of my friends screened First Cow and love them for that. They did. That's really awesome that they screened that. But a lot of people were like, "Oh, I just found this way too slow and too boring." And
Mm,
that is something that I can see certain tastes in movies not understanding. And
yeah.
I'm not here to say that they're wrong. I'm not here to, because it is, in a weird way, yes, it is slow and boring, but I don't see that as an overt negative. I actually see that as a strength.
Yeah.
And I think that Reichardt really takes her time with stories, but at the same time is still to the point and concise, which is a really weird balance to have as a director, because like there's you could take the Belatar approach to slow cinema and be like, here's a 2.5 hour movie that I stretched out to 8 hours because I can. Now, obviously, Silent Tongue was a masterpiece. I will defend it any day of the week. But, that is a movie where not a lot happens. Whereas
Yeah.
in Reichardt cinema, a lot happens, but it might not be exciting.
Mhm.
It's like ordinary conversations between two friends as they reconnect. A woman looking for a dog for 80 minutes. Uh, Two guys stealing milk from a cow. I think that people just expect movies to be extraordinary more now. But Reichardt's so good at capturing the seemingly ordinary. Like you'll never see a dream sequence. You'll never see like a
Mm.
weird, like trippy montage, like a lot of like there's this sensibility in indie cinema to do all these things, and in the right circumstance, they could be good, even great.
Yeah.
But I think that there's a level of realism that Reichardt has because we've talked a lot about how deeply human her films is, and I think that's because she takes a realist, maybe almost neo-realist approach to her filmmaking.
That was the key word there, a neorealist. Because she said that she gets a lot of inspiration from those films, and it will tie into one of my double bills. But a couple of things that you said before we wrap it up, but I think that definitely there's a lot of people who find it boring, and that's fair. I think that the same way that they might find a Bergman film boring or a Bresson film boring because it's, if you were to step in to a group conversation that's not gossipy, like you're out with your friends and someone steps in, they might also think it's boring, but you guys are having the best time
Hmm.
because it's human. And then someone else might step in and think this is so fascinating to hear parts of these people's lives that I would have never otherwise heard. It really is a personality thing. Um,
Yeah.
and I bring that up also because I think we also do it here in Toronto, but I think it's more of a thing in the States where I don't know which cinema might do it there, but there's like a secret movie club that you guys have at some of the chain ones. And when the Mastermind was coming out,
Yep.
there was the Mastermind that was screened as a secret movie club, and
I
as
missed
someone
that one.
who's
And
on like, is it? Oh, did you? Oh no.
yeah, yeah, they did. I missed that one because it's Monday nights at 7.
Oh,
So it's not only is it during our film club, but it's also during my class. And so I've never been able to make the Monday mystery movies, but I had a friend who goes every week, and he texts me
you saw
immediately. He
it?
goes, "Oh, I just saw the Mastermind." I'm like, "You did? Oh my gosh!" And
Oh
then it
wow.
wasn't. It's weird because I lived so far from like LA proper. I had to
Yeah,
drive like an hour and a half to go see the Mastermind, and I just couldn't fit it into my schedule. So I haven't seen the Mastermind yet.
I haven't
I
seen it yet either.
I had planned on seeing it before this podcast, but unfortunately it didn't work out this time. So, but yeah, that's such a weird movie to show for a mystery movie because it's going to be either one of those you love it or you don't.
Well, exactly.
At least if it's anything like the Reichardts I know.
Yeah, exactly. I brought it up mainly because I do partake in film Twitter as toxic as it can be, but
Yeah.
there was a lot of people on Twitter who had seen it and it was like very divided. Some people were like, "Oh my God, I can't believe we get to see the new Reichardt for the Secret Movie Club," and other people were like, "I what is this movie?"
Yep.
They were, you're expecting something maybe probably more exciting. And they were like, there's a lot of jazz and a lot of quietness, and they just weren't prepared for it. And I do think it's kind of, and I say this with love, kind of hilarious to surprise people, a group of people who probably have never seen a Kylie Reichardt film for like a secret movie club film.
Yeah, because I think it is something where you have to know what you're getting into to some extent. Because
Yeah,
my first Reichardt movie was First Cow because I'd heard that I had a friend who worked on it, and I was like, oh, I want to watch that for myself. And I saw it, and I was like, I guess I wasn't quite prepared for what I was getting into, but at the same time, I kind of was because I knew a little bit about the basic story and characters and the vibe of the film. But there's also this level of like, if you're expecting something more quick edited and more, I don't want to say exciting because Kelly Reichardt's exciting in its own way,
yeah,
uh, but something more like traditional, I guess. It
yeah.
is like Reichardt is a very non-traditional filmmaker in the sense that she doesn't follow a lot of like the rules of what makes modern cinema what it is. And I think that that's awesome. But also, some people are some people are not going to vibe with it because they expect something they're not getting.
No, exactly. I mean, you and I would have been like very excited and happy to
Mhm.
be surprised by the mastermind. That's for sure. But I also can see the other side
Yeah,
of things. I just do think it's funny that was the case. I'm very excited to finally, I hope to see it soon.
same.
Um, but I
But
know that it had a limited run. So
I'm nervous about the Mastermind for one reason
are
and one
you?
reason only. Well, it's not shot in Oregon, and that's like the thing that I love
Oh
about
yeah, I
Reichardt.
know. I know.
Like that's my one. I can't even call it a complaint because like that's just my personal taste. It's like Kelly
Yeah.
Reichardt
Yeah.
works best when she's shooting the beautiful greeneries landscapes of Portland in the outside areas. Like that's my favorite flavor of Reichardt. But you know, I'm still excited to see the Mastermind. That's just like the one thing where I'm like, you're gonna have she's gonna have to prove me wrong a little bit more.
Yeah. That's fair. That's fair. It might be something like because I know Certain Women was in Montana, so maybe it'll give you
Yeah,
that vibe if you like that movie. So we'll see. I am excited for it. At least any if we get a year with a Kelly Reichardt film, I'm happy. That
true,
means
true,
things
true.
are in a
Mm,
at least a good groove at some point. With through all the trash that we had to wade through, we at least get something like that. But
yeah.
curious if there's anything that we haven't mentioned that you want to bring up before I ask you the final question of the show?
I think we've covered everything that
Yeah.
I've thought about. Is there anything that you think we haven't covered? Because I'm curious.
No, I think that we did cover. I mostly, to be honest, I mean, there's multiple reasons why I wanted to have you on the show because I just wanted to chat and
Mm,
I wanted your opinion, but I mostly wanted your energy, your Portland, energy and giving that actual background. And I'm glad that you did, and I'm glad that we get that because everyone else I've spoken to, which everyone, I love you, but none of you
of
have been
course.
are from Portland, so you can't give me the background that
Mm,
uh you can. So I'm very glad. But I think that we covered everything that I wanted to speak about. I mean, there's always more that you can speak about a film, but I think
yeah.
that we've covered what we want to say. So I will
Yep.
um I still have one more question for you, and that is the double bill question. If you're pairing Wendy and Lucy with another film or films, if you have more than one option, what are you pairing it with and why?
See, there's so many directions I could go with this because my immediate thought was in a really, really weird way, Wendy and Lucy is very similar to DeSica's Bicycle Thieves.
Okay, yeah.
I think there's a lot of interesting parallels in there about like what it means to provide for other people and like what does it look like when things go
Mm-hmm.
wrong. Like that's a common theme, not just in Bicycle Thieves, but in DeSica's general work.
Yeah.
But I think Bicycle Thieves captures the slice of life aspect a lot better than others because I just recently watched Shoe Shine, which I did enjoy, but I felt like the ending was too. I don't want to say it wasn't real. It is, but it's like, it doesn't feel a slice of life. It feels like a big moment in someone's life when you witness what the main characters witnessed. So it doesn't feel quite as. I don't want to say it's not as neorealist, but it's like it doesn't feel as like slice of life. But
Mm-hmm.
um, I mean, you could also go with like other Portland shot movies. One that comes to mind. This is a weird comparison, and I can't believe I'm
Okay.
making it. It's coming to my mind right now. So it was a movie that came out in 2021 called Pig, starring Nicolas Cage. It's
Okay.
not what you think. It's not what you think. Basically, Nick Cage is like a man who lives in the forest, and his only friend is like this like pig, and then the pig gets stolen, and then he like goes on like a quest. Not it's kind of like almost like action movie esque, where it's like he's like on a quest for vengeance to find this stolen
Okay.
pig. But that's another comparison because that's another movie shot in Portland, another movie that my friend worked on. So
Oh, nice.
there's that angle of it as well. But if you haven't seen it, I think it's quite delightful. It's hard to sell it to people because the second you mention Nick Cage, then they immediately go, I have no idea. Like, either they're going to be like, I'm in or I'm absolutely out. But it's like Nick Cage has a weird career because like every like 5 or 6 years, he'll develop an Oscar worthy performance. And I think Pig
Yeah.
is in that category. I think he could have been nominated for an Oscar, but didn't happen. But I think those are the two that immediately come to mind. I guess I could also go for like the this movie has nothing to do with like Wendy and Lucy, but it has like that like Northwest green look that I love. And I just want to shout it out because I just watched it recently. Clint Bentley's Train Dreams.
Okay. I don't
it's
know.
not really that much of a pair. It's a Netflix movie that just came out this year. I saw it in theaters twice. Yeah, it's one of the few movies that came out this year that I'm like really, really into. So, uh, but it's got that same like Northwest look to it, I guess, even though I think it was shot in British Columbia, but I might be wrong on that. It's got the, like, I just love movies when they're shot in that Northwest area that they really emphasize the greens because like it's one of the first things that you notice when you get into the Northwest is like there's so much green. Like I quote that scene from Star Wars: The Force Awakens where they're like, I can't believe there's so much green in the whole galaxy. That's like when you land in Portland for the first time.
I love that. Those are all good. They're your third choice I haven't heard of, so I definitely am gonna look into that. That's for sure. Pig, I haven't seen yet, but only ever heard the best things about it. And I
Mhm.
also heard that everyone says his performance is really getting back to, peak great Cage performances, and he should have been nominated for, we all know, I don't have to tell you, uh the Academy is questionable at the very least.
Always
And then
flawed.
Desika, yeah. Desika is funny because one of my first choices is also a Desika film, and I think it's very fitting because she is heavily influenced by I- Italian neorealism, and one of the biggest directors would be DeSica. So the one I had on my list, because it was the very first thing that I thought about when I watched it, but I thought about Umberto Day, which is DeSica, but an older man with a dog. It's on the nose, but sometimes, I mean, if you really want to cry and you want to watch two movies,
Hmm.
two kind of sad movies about a dog and someone who is having a hard time. Both people are having a hard time financially searching for their dogs. They both have pound moments, and but not to give anything away about Umberto Day if you haven't seen it, the listener. But if you really are like, you know what, I need a good cleanse, and I just want to cry it out, you should watch those back to back.
Yeah.
'Cause, that'll put a damper on your night, but you'll have watched 2 very good films. So really, is your night ruined or is it enriched? Um,
Depends on the
and
person, I
then
guess.
exactly. And my second one would be Wanda, which is a Barbara Loden
Mm,
film from
hmm.
1970.
Hmm.
I just think if you're looking at a woman who is taking life into her own hands and things can be rough as she's trying to travel through and make money and just live life, but she's still in charge for the most part of her own life. You get to see two spectrums of two different women from different eras, living their own lives and seeing how the environment around them affects their day to day. So, uh, and two women directors. So you
Yep.
could do that. That's good back to back. So all five, you gave three, I gave two. Those are all great films. You can pick from any of those. And if you haven't seen any of them, you're gonna need to add them to your letterbox
Yep.
watch list ASAP.
Also,
Well,
watch Wendy and Lucy if you haven't for some reason. And
I hope
even though
so.
we spoiled this entire movie, but
I know.
you know, it'll take less time to watch Wendy and Lucy than it might to listen to this podcast episode. So that might be a sell.
Exactly. So do that, and it would take, to be honest, I think TV show episodes are probably the same length as like Wendy and Lucy at this rate.
That
So,
can be, yeah.
I think you're in better hands. Again, not to shit on television, but you're in better hands at Reichardt. That's for sure.
Yeah.
But Josh, I am so grateful that I finally got you back on, and I hope to have you back on again soon. But I'm so happy that you came on and lent your knowledge about Portland, but also Reichardt and just your enthusiasm for film
Hmm.
on the show. So thank you for coming
Yeah.
back.
Also, super important note. Just
Yes.
want to know that there are two different Josh Cooleys that have done this podcast, which is really
Yes.
fun and really great to explain to people. So if you listen to any of Felicia's other reviews with another Josh Cooley, the only one I've done is Patterson. I think she mentioned that before, but just to be sure. So if you're like, oh, I want to hear this Josh Cooley's take on Naked Lunch, it's like, well, I'd love to talk about Naked Lunch with you. Please DM me on Instagram @_Josh Cooley _. But that's on this podcast. That's not me. That's another Josh Cooley. So just want to shout him
Yes.
out because he's cool too. And obviously he's on this podcast. But
It is funny that I have had 2 Josh Cooleys. What I usually do in the show notes is call it out to be like, this is the previous episodes that you've done. So
cool. Great.
it's out
Fantastic.
there and people can distinguish. But I'm glad that you also mentioned it. But yeah, thanks again for coming on.
Yeah. Thanks for inviting me. I really appreciate being on here. It's always a pleasure, always a joy.
Seeing Faces in Movies is an official podcast of the Royal Film Club. It's hosted and edited by Felicia and Lonnie, with intro music by Lamar Walker. If you like what you heard, let us know at seeingfacesmovies.com or send us an email at seeingfacesmovies@gmail.com. And while you're at it, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks for joining us for the Reichardt series, and stay tuned for the announcement of our next filmmaker in focus. Watch more movies, and we'll catch you soon.